Hello and welcome to a sailing performance demo video. Today we're going to be looking at RaceReplay and the configuration. In the latest version of RaceReplay, there's some new options in the configuration file that are pretty handy to be able to use. So that's what we're going to run over today. We can see here we have our opening screen of RaceReplay. We have our boat loaded in, we have a config file loaded in, we have a log file loaded in. So we're now going to open up the config manager. And the bit we're going to be interested in today is calculated variables. So we can see here we have a new calculated variable option, which is called derivative, and another one called step. The derivative is a fairly interesting one for working out the rate of change of something. So for instance, we take the derivative of the boat speed in order to get acceleration. For heading, we could take the derivative of heading in order to get the rate of turn of the boat. So an instance where we might want to use that is in our start calculations for creating an acceleration table in Expedition, for instance. So we would then create a derivative of boat speed, which we have here, and that will be in knots per second. So that is how fast the boat is accelerate in knots per second. So for Expedition, we need to have it in knots per minute. So once we have our acceleration of knots per second, we can take the boat speed derivative and times that by 60. One of the other new functions we have is this ghost feature. Now what ghost is that allows us to have an intermediate calculated variable that we might want to not use in RaceReplay. So for instance, we have the derivative of the boat speed, which is in knots per second, but that is not something we want to look at in RaceReplay because we want to look in knots per minute. So we can create a ghost variable, and that's an intermediate variable to get us to knots per minute. One of the other options is this step value. And so what we're going to use steps for is to create steps or a bin. So one of the things we might want to use it for is heel. And so we would create a heel step. Then we can use our wizard to say that we want to go from 0 to say 35 degrees with a step value of 2. And that will then create these. Now we'd also want to select the absolute value to make sure that because RaceReplay always thinks that the heel is in positive, and so we want to make sure we have the absolute value for that. So this will now round the heel to closest 2 degrees. The point of the step function is so that we can create trend lines in a VMG graph of the function of heel and see how much VMG you lose by sailing at 2 degrees off the optimum heel. So it just allows us to have a bit more control, and we'll have a look in a second how that looks in RaceReplay. So once we've created all our variables, we're then going to save the config file and open up RaceReplay. So we now have RaceReplay open, and we can see here we have all our phases loaded, and we're ready to start looking at some graphs. So we have an XY graph open here. And the first graph we're going to have a look at is heel. We're going to use our heel step versus VMG. And so if we now just put this into upwind, just to make our life a little bit easier. So we can see here that our heel step is only at every second number as we asked it to do, so 16, 18, and so on and so on. And it then allows the data to be seen a lot more clearly. So we can then start to say that our better VMG is somewhere between 20 and 24 degrees of heel. So that's a handy little feature. So the other features we can look at is the derivatives. If we go to our boat data now, we can see we have our acceleration and our heading rate of turn. So the acceleration again is the derivative of the boat speed, and we've calculated this to be in knots per minute, so that number effectively is straight to go into Expedition. So one of the ways we could do this is we could create some wands. Now, if you're looking for acceleration, you're probably going to want to look at coming out of attack or something like that. So we can create create some ones, and then we can look at our acceleration number. And then you can start to play around to see. So at the moment the boat is actually not accelerating, so we probably made our ones a little bit too long, and we're a little bit before the tack there. So you just need to play around with your numbers to find it. The other place you might really want to look at it is actually in the pre-start. So you might come over here and place a wand at the pre-start, and then you can start to look at what your acceleration was on the pre-start. So if we have a look here, we can see that actually during this start the boat was trying to burn speed. They might have been a little bit early, but that gives you an idea of how that feature works. We could also do the same. We could create our rate of turn. So we could have a rate of turn here, and then we could have a look at during our pre-start maneuvers here. So our rate of turn here was 8.1 degrees in 12.5 knots. So that's something we might want to look at putting into Expedition. So that concludes the config video, which covers derivative and step. Hopefully you found that useful, and we'll be able to find some good uses for it in the future. As always, you can contact us if you need further information or support on how to use these functions.